the world that we live in today is a world that was created in many ways by John
No
Paul
wonder
II.
he had this love for an affinity for human dignity, because looking at the situation, these people were so poorly treated, like that human dignity was often stripped away
The
from
thing
them.
is, he lived through that reshaping. He saw the consequences of it. He saw the incredible suffering of the lack of human dignity in what this new utopian ideal was trying to achieve.
Welcome back to the Everyday Sane podcast. Today we are here with Bogdan. Why don't you start off by just sharing, this conversation is going to be a lot about the legacy of Pope St. John Paul II, but particularly in the context of his Polish heritage, which was very important to him. So would you be able to start off just by sharing what was it about Poland and his heritage that was really important to Pope St. John Paul II?
So the important thing to understand about John Paul II, born Karol Wojtyła, was that he was born into a country that he was born in 1920, May 18th, 1920, and into a country that hadn't existed for 123 years. That was fighting for its independence. His father was a military man, joined the Polish army in 1918, and so he was born into a society, a country that understood, where the people understood the value of the freedom of speech, expression, the freedom of worshiping how they would like to, of raising their children in an environment where they can be proud of their culture, their heritage, their faith, and this was incredibly impactful. So there was kind of that light that John Paul II was born into, mixed in with a lot of trials and tribulations. Personally, his mother died when he was 9, a month before his communion, actually, and when he was 12, he lost his older brother, who died from scarlet fever. Um, and But his father was the Rock, and he actually famously took his son when he was 9 to Częstochowa, and he said, which is a very holy place for Catholics in Poland, and there's a painting there of Mary. We call her the Blessed Mary of Częstochowa, or the Black Madonna, and he told him that your mother is dead, but always remember that you have your eternal mother. She's always with you. In the terms of Mary, his deep devotion to Mary started there at a very early age, and that of course translated later on when he was priest, bishop, archbishop, cardinal, and of course pope. But John Paul II for Poland. It's my family's from Krakow. Both of my parents were confirmed by him, and I can tell.
Wow.
Yeah, as when he was archbishop. And what I can tell you is that he was our Moses. He set our people free, and it was a process, but he gave people hope. He injected hope into a society that didn't have it after the trials and tribulations of the Second World War. Poland was invaded by the Germans and then by the Soviets. Both of them were systems of authoritarian totalitarianism. And then they fell under the sway of communist regime, the Soviet Union, and people lost hope for a very long time. And in 1979, when October 16th, every kind of people, it's a date that kind of lives in Polish people's minds. It was absolutely unreal, incredible. How could a Pole become Pope? Also, there hadn't been a non-Italian pope for 455 years, which is important to remember. But yes, he was the first Polish pope, and for us, the consequences of that later on translated into a free Poland, into a Poland with democratic elections, representative government, and where people could again worship freely. So yeah.
Wow. I mean, just such things that we don't even think about as Americans, right? And just the gravity of the situation. At the time, you mentioned that your parents were confirmed by what was later Pope John Paul II. What was the general thought about him before he was even Pope? Did people know his name? Was he someone that people still looked to? Because from my perspective, he seemed to have this like magnanimous personality. People just were attracted to him when he was Pope. So I'm curious what people thought about him even
Well,
before his papacy.
he he came from humble beginnings, and that is very important to remember. He came from humble beginnings. His early life was very tough in terms of he didn't come from a very wealthy family, but there was a deep sense of compassion, of the understanding of human dignity. You know, he worked with his hands. He worked at a stone quarry. He worked. Um, uh, he saw the dignity in work of the laborers and things of that nature. He saw the dignity of the struggle of the common people. He saw the suffering of the common people in his country. That was just horrific in terms of his Poles, Jews, the Holocaust that happened. His dear friend Jerzy Kluger and his father, they only survived because they were actually part of the Polish army and were taken. They were both Jewish, and they were taken to the gulags in Siberia. But the rest of their family died during the Holocaust because they remained in Poland and they were killed in the concentration camps. And so, you're talking about, things that are truly hard to understand for kind of a modern American audience, even the scale of horror and suffering. Half of Polish high school teachers and all the way down to kindergarten, half were died during the war. Were killed. Intelligentsia, professors, a third of all professors, a third of all dentists, lawyers, doctors, scout leaders. It was just a horrific experience. So, and then communism following in 1945 and onwards, and the suppression of freedom of speech, people going in and out of prisons. And I bring this all up because it's just to understand that there was a tremendous amount of darkness that he persevered through. And he was starting in 1942. He was in an underground seminary. And in 1946, he became a priest. On November 1st and then November 2nd, he celebrated 3 masses. But starting then, he reached out to young people. He constantly was worried about, the common man, and especially living in such a dark time. And one thing to also remember is he's 26 when he becomes a priest, and then in 1958 he becomes the youngest bishop in Polish history. He was 38 years old at the time, and that I think speaks for quite loudly about the fact that he was seen by the church hierarchy. They in Poland, they were like this young priest, now bishop, has a future. He draws people to him, and he does it in such a natural way. And even back then, I've met people who knew him before he was archbishop, when he was still a priest. And there's just this power that when he was around people. And then his elevation to archbishop is an interesting story, because he was on a list. He wasn't on a list. The communist authorities demanded that from the other archbishop that the list be given to them of possible candidates, and they said no to the first list. They demanded a second one. They said no to that one, and Wyszyński, the archbishop, wanted Karol Wojtyła to be archbishop, and so he didn't put his name on the list. And they were like, "Oh, how about this guy?" And he's like, "Oh, no, he's far too young." And they're like, "Oh, that's perfect. We'll put him into this position."
Hmm.
And he, was seen by people as an absolute leader. And Wyszyński saw his future, made sure that and his potential. He made sure that he kind of took the brunt of the ire of the communists, of the totalitarian state, and then kind of under the radar, Karol Wojtyła could operate, could visit other countries, could see the world. So by the time that he becomes Pope in October 16th, 1978, he has seen the world. He has spoken to other people. He has seen the problems of the world. He has seen the problems of the Catholic Church, and he was able to address them. So he was ready for that role, and he stepped into it with an incredible energy, and I think that because he endured such hardships, because he endured such darkness, he was molded kind of like a diamond through the greatest pressures, through the greatest darkness, and I think that is incredibly powerful.
Yes, and by the time then he was elected pope, what was the state of Poland then? What were some of the problems that they were facing? Because I imagine, I mean, there's years of healing and
Mm.
um, whatnot, really, that needs to occur after everything that they had been through. So, what was that kind of looking like for him when he was elected as pope?
So when he became pope, October 16th, 1978, uh, he, a lot of people thought that he would first visit Poland. His first visit was to Mexico, and that's another story. But um, he he knew the problems intimately. He was listening to people's confessions, the struggles that they had, having food on the table, not being able to. There was no hope for a better future. There were incredible, bread lines in terms of the scarcity of all sorts of products, and it was essentially manufactured by the government to keep people down. Repression of speaking out in terms of freedom of speech. If you were known to be a Catholic and like openly worshiping, you would be kept away from certain positions within the government, within education, and this was to be a quote unquote party member. That was they would make sure that you weren't participating in such things, and so the church at the time was seen by many people in Poland as kind of because it was part of the founding of the Polish state millennium prior in 966 AD as the only representative of the people, and a lot of people turned to the church and its leadership, and the communist government cracked down because, of course, as far as they're concerned, this is a godless country now, and they're not going to put up with such practices or such bygone practices as they saw it, and so they cracked down on religion. They cracked down on they would be putting priests in jail, nuns, blackmailing, torturing, truly horrific practices. And so when John Paul II came in, he knew all these things, and he wanted to come specifically for his first visit in 1979. He wanted to come in May for the 900th anniversary of the martyrdom of the patron saint of Poland, Saint Stanislaus, who spoke out against the king, and he was murdered by the king for this. And so the communist authorities thought that this was a little bit too on the nose, too comparable to their situation, that they are, in effect, the king, the representative of governance and government in Poland, and that, so, and they were carrying out repressions against the church, against priests, against the faithful. And so they decided, instead of giving him 2 days in May, they gave him 9 days in June, which I believe is the best mistake they've ever made. Because when he came to Poland, all of a sudden the world was able to see on their televisions the millions of people that came out to see him, the millions of faithful. And of course, they tried to run interference, try to stop people, say that there was an epidemic breaking out in every single venue that he was going to. The police literally stood in, or militia, as they were called, militia. They stood in lines trying to stop people from coming in and like seeing him. But people did, and you couldn't stop it. If you come and visit our beautiful exhibit, you can see the enormous crowds standing in what was then Victory Square in the heart of Warsaw. And so, and John Paul II is there behind him, an enormous cross in a communist country. And that picture is incredible. And at the time, it inspired the Polish people. It gave people hope. And as, he famously said, Niech stąpi duch twój, which is, let your spirit descend. And it was, a truly powerful visit that motivated the people, gave people hope that there is a chance to have a better life, and that sparked a whole series of workers' movements, specifically the Solidarity movement, which literally was asking for some sort of dignity for being treated and with some for workers. And famously, the leader of that movement, when the government finally caved in, and they caved in to all the demands about just treating the workers with dignity, but it wasn't just the dockyard workers. It was workers for all of Poland, and he signed it with a pen with John Paul II's likeness on it. And so that fight continued, obviously, for the dignity. There was a crackdown in 1981, where the government essentially declared martial law against the populace, and incredible repression starting then. But by 1989, it all came to a head, and the Berlin Wall fell, and the Solidarity movement had a huge part to do with it, and it wouldn't have started without John Paul II, and him visiting, him speaking to this was incredibly powerful, incredibly important, and he galvanized that part of the world without question. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. And probably too for them to have seen so many people coming together for such a cause, like that would have been really empowering for the Polish people at the time. Like, I'm not alone in this thought. Like, I'm not alone in this fight either. Like, we can do this,
Right.
right? And we can overcome what we're facing. And I just think it's so interesting to think about. No wonder he had this love for an affinity for human dignity, because looking at the situation, these people were so poorly treated. Like, that human dignity was often stripped away from them in many
Right.
ways, and that independence that we take for granted. And that's very inspirational to hear about how much of an impact that he had on the Polish people as Pope, because he's Pope of the whole world, and yet
Right.
it's his hometown really that was impacted so greatly
Right.
by him, which is incredible. And we just had our first American Pope elected, and I don't know about everyone else. This is kind of the general thought I've gotten to, but it's very patriotic to have
Yeah.
someone from your home country elected for Pope. So, knowing that what we know about Pope St. John Paul II, what are some things you think will correlate with Pope Leo's legacy as the first American Pope?
Just like with John Paul II, who came from Poland and understood its problems, its struggles, Leo, I believe, understands, obviously, America. Chicago born. I went to school in DePaul University, and so in Chicago, and so I heard his accent, and I was like, my goodness, this is so shocking. I've never heard not only an American accent, but like that nice Chicago accent. But Pope Leo understands America. He understands also, he was in Peru for a long time. He understands that part of the world as well. And that's important, I think. It's important. Again, he's from here. He understands America better than someone who would be out from outside. He understands, things in Latin America. And he understands the struggles of the Catholic Church, and I think in the Americas in general, it's necessary that we have, and I mean both North and South, it's necessary that we have someone who understands the needs of the people, then that the faithful are looking for a leader who can lead them and who can speak in a way with their voice, because as John Paul II said. And to Poles, do not cut the roots from which you are born, in the sense that don't neglect who you are as a people, as faithful Catholics. Don't forget who you are and where you come from. Don't cut off those roots. And I think a lot of young people, especially, uh, are looking to hear what Pope Leo has to say, looking for his leadership, and it's exciting. I'm both Polish and American, and I have the distinct privilege to live in a time where I I was born in 1990, so for 15 years John Paul II was my pope, and then now I got to see American pope. By the way, I told everyone, I was like, oh, there's no way. There's no way there's going to be an American pope. Like, that's the one thing I know. And I'm glad to say I don't know everything. So I'm a bit humbled,
Mhm.
because the church decided that this was the correct choice, and it looks like they were right. So it's exciting. And having someone who can speak with knowing the idiosyncrasies, knowing those little American details, like that's powerful. And that, I think, very much looking forward to his first trip to the United States. But it's going to be monumental, I believe, for all of us, for the world, but certainly for the United States, um, and for us young cats. Well, for I'm 35, but for young Catholics, I think it's very important. Yeah.
I agree to have that and to see someone who seems a little bit closer to us in a lot of ways. And I would love to know what you would hope, especially granted, we're not in the same situation as Poland was when
Hmm.
Pope St. John Paul II was elected, but he had such an impact on the Polish people. What are a couple things that you're hoping to see Pope Leo impacts when it comes to particularly young Catholics in America?
To not be ashamed of their faith. And I think there was a lot of that also in Poland, that people felt a hopelessness. Um, and John Paul II, was saying, it's like, no, this is, you turn to your faith, turn to the gospel. Like, this is important. And I think that for having an American pope being able to speak to that, to young Catholics and to people who are questioning their faith, I think that is incredibly impactful. And I've noticed a trend that it's almost rebellious now to be not just Christian but Catholic, certainly,
Mhm.
especially for the younger generation, in the sense that yeah, you're making quite a statement, and I think it's a beautiful statement, it's a profound statement. But I think for him coming and speaking to those people, to the youth, just like John Paul II did, and that's the other thing. Like, he he wanted to make sure that young Catholics, like, about the issues that are important to us, right? Of having a family, of, well, life, of the intimacy between people, and you know what gives us purpose, what gives us meaning. And there's such almost ephemeral topics, but there's John Paul II, at a very early age in his priesthood, and what he was reaching out to his friends. He was meeting with, going out to the mountains, in the lakes and the rivers in Poland, and it was called his środowisko, or his surroundings, in best translation, I suppose. But it was, he was out there with young people. He was talking to them, and that translated later in life when he, as Pope, he started the World Youth Days, and I think that looking forward to a World Youth Day here in the States, maybe, hopefully soon. So, um, I mean, there's so much that Leo
Right.
can address, uh, and I think a voice of clarity is needed, for the church, and certainly for the American church. Yeah,
Absolutely. And it's really exciting, I think,
yeah,
to
absolutely.
be in that space and thinking back even to Pope St. John Paul II and his legacy of having these World Youth Days, of calling people together, and that background where he was able to experience so many cultures before he even became Pope. What do you think about his Polish background in particular influenced his capacity as pope. Like, he just did so much. And was there anything specifically about his upbringing in the Polish culture you think that really helped him in that?
Absolutely. I think there are a couple of things. For especially, there's a period in time in Poland where arguably Poland, it was called when Poland was part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So this is 1569 to 1772, and then Poland stopped existing on the maps of Europe in I'm sorry, 1792, and it stopped existing for 123 years until 1918. But Poland was a very ethnically and religiously diverse country with a lot of freedoms for religious minorities, for ethnic minorities for the time. There's also a very large representative population in terms of people who could vote. Actually, more people could vote in Poland. It was still landed and male, but then at the beginning of the United States, which is shocking. So that's what, 1781. So like when full independence was accomplished. But what's more, in Poland, the Poland that he grew up, the Poland that had just come back onto the map, again, only about, it was 65% ethnic Poles. Then you had Lithuanians, you had Ukrainians, you had Belarusians, Armenian Copts, and then the most Jews in the entire world. So about 3.3 million Jews lived in Poland at the time, and so it was ethnically and religiously very diverse, and he grew up in that. He grew up in that Poland because the Poland after that, in 1945, when the borders were reshaped, there was also incredible amounts of ethnic cleansing done by the Soviets, where they would forcibly remove people, including Poles. My entire family is from what is not now today Poland, and so they had to flee or be sent to the gulags. But Poland became an ethno-state because that was what Stalin wanted. It was easier to manage an ethnically homogenous state than it was a state that was culturally diverse, that was religiously diverse, in his mind, at least. And so the reality that he grew up in, John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła, was fundamental in later on how he treated other cultures, how he treated other religions and faiths. When he went to university, he was studying 14 languages in his first year, 9 of which became very important later on. He used them quite a lot as Pope. And I don't speak Spanish as well as I should, but from what I understand, his Spanish was even better than his English. To me, I understand his English quite well because I grew up with the Polish accent my entire life. But it was something that he was comfortable with, that he felt natural in, and that he didn't waver from. He went to tough places all around the world, and kind of went head on a lot of the times in terms of what he said, how he addressed things. And I think that's because he grew up in a society where tough conversations were had, and but again, it was a very ethnically and religiously diverse country. So yeah.
Right. And something you mentioned earlier that he would say about, he had a quote about kind of going back to his roots or remembering your roots. Why do you think that's so important to him, but also important to us today?
I think it's become fashionable, to be modern or whatnot, to kind of say, oh, if it was in the past, then it was, to simplify it, that it was bad. If it was something that we are bringing some sort of tradition forward with us, but it's rooted in the past, we're gonna reshape the world. We're gonna reform the world. The thing is, communism is one of those ideas where you reform the world, you reshape the world, or you create a modern utopia. Thing is, he lived through that reshaping. He saw the consequences of it. He saw the incredible suffering of the lack of human dignity in what this new utopian ideal was trying to achieve. And I think that it's an important message today when you hear so many voices that, to cut away from, tradition and to all that happened in the past is should not be remembered or respected or commemorated. And I think his message is very poignant today of not cutting away your roots, because there's something there, and the church has persisted for 2 millennia, and it's changing. It's hopefully for the better, but there are persistent messages that we need to remember about and to carry them forward, understanding why they are important, and I think that is something that he fought for desperately and deeply believed in. And one of my favorite quotes that he had was that wherever he goes, he would hold the seeds of the gospel, right? And that he would let them fall, and then he would keep walking. And then those trees that grew up behind him were from the seeds of the gospel, but that he didn't have time to look back, and he didn't have time to look at those trees, at those forests. And so I think it is the responsibility of every generation to take care of those forests, especially in places like Poland, but also all over the world, because he changed so much of the world, and that's something that's the world that we live in today is a world that was created in many ways by John Paul II.
Yes, and I know you've seen the impact of that as someone who has Polish heritage, and appreciating all that Pope St. John Paul II did. And as we wrap up here, I would love to know your thoughts on, us as Americans and how we can go forward supporting Pope Leo as fellow Americans. What can we be doing for him?
What can we be doing? That is a
I
tall.
know it's a really big
That's
question,
a
but I'm just, knowing how much the Poland people loved Pope St. John Paul II, and how we can support Pope Leo.
I think it's important to, just like many societies, Poland included, America's very divided right now on a lot of issues, and I think it's important to have grace, and to look forward to Pope Leo coming here to the United States, and to a lot of people, people are very reactionary in the way that they respond to something someone will say, and like, oh, I agree or disagree, or it's like, oh, I'm not listening to this person anymore. That's a bad way to approach any situation, but especially with Pope Leo, I think we need to have our hearts open, and listen to what he has to say, and reflect on our faith, on what is important in our lives, and to just be open to the Pope's message, because he has I'm sure he will have a lot to say, and so yeah, I don't know if that was
No,
yeah.
I think I definitely agree with what you're saying too, and just I had this theory as I was preparing for the conclave, not well, listening to the conclave maybe, or anticipating what might be happening. And I just kind of had this thought that I don't know if we'll ever have a pope again that we like, because of a lot of times like media coverage and whatnot the general idea and people coming together in these general ideas, right? Like, I'm sure there was people who didn't like Pope St. John Paul II. I'm sure there was people who didn't like Pope Benedict, but you didn't have social media and the media in the capacity that it does now. So people might not have liked him, but you didn't see this come across as the general thought. And I was worried for the next pope, of wondering if it could happen, not to follow with blind obedience, right? Of okay, maybe he should have said that in a different way, and
Sure.
but just coming at it with a stance of grace too, and knowing that anything and everything that he says is now recorded, and just having that grace that he's the pope, but he's also still human, and that we have to be praying for him as often as we can.
And we need to, his role is to, as far as I see it, or what I would hope for, is to bring people together. We live in a time that is very similar to, I mean, I hope not, but it's important to remember that when John Paul II was Pope, there were on either side of the world, in terms of the powers that were kind of jostling, there were 10,000 warheads, right, on one side and 10,000 on the other. You could destroy the world many times over. The idea of Eastern Europe, the change that happened, if you talk to the quote unquote smartest people in the room, folks at the Pentagon, the New York Times, universities all over the United States and Western Europe and whatnot, they would tell you that it was an impossibility for communism to fall in Eastern Europe. And it's certainly, and there are articles like this even in 1988 and 1989. One of my favorite ones is from the New York Times, but neither here nor there. And they wrote that certainly John Paul II is not going to bring about some sort of change in this part of the world. Communism is here, and it is here to stay. And yet John Paul II did it. He did it through speaking about the dignity of the human person, about living the truth. And that's important to remember, that the last wave of democratization all over the world, and again, this isn't just Poland and the Czechs and the Slovaks and Hungarians and the Baltic countries. It's not just that part of the world, but you're also looking at, his visits to especially like Latin America, so Paraguay, Argentina, Brazil, Haiti, and you'd see those changes in those countries, right? Where they would come after a while, the governments would change, they would topple, and more democratic systems of representation would come from that. Him coming and speaking, and even in Ireland, where there was the horrible bombings and conflict that was going on there between the Catholics and the Protestants, and people, in those groups would tell him, "Don't come here. We don't want you here." But those were kind of the more radical elements of those groups. But the people did. And because of his visit, after, some time, there was they came to the table and they came to some sort of accord, and they came, and so there's peace there now. And that's because of John Paul II. And so I'm saying all of this because he was a leader of his time, a moral leader, a faith leader, but also someone who lived through great strife and fought against it. And it's because of that, because of the incredible strife that he endured, that his people endured, that he fought for the dignity of all mankind, because he understood man's inhumanity to man. And he was just saying resolutely, never again. And I think Pope Leo, in today's world, he sees, we see the conflicts that are happening, and he sees them. And I think, America is an incredibly powerful country, arguably the most powerful country in the history of the world. And so him being able to speak to the consciousness of Americans, but also the consciousness of other countries and leaders, and to influence that, I think could be very impactful, coming from a place of faith, of decency, of dignity for the human person, and respect for all mankind. I think it's a very Christian message, and I think both pontiffs certainly believed in that, and so yeah, I look forward to Leo's leadership. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a really powerful point. So I think I'll leave the people there that they can
absolutely.
continue reflecting and continue praying for our popes, asking for the intercession of Pope St. John Paul II. Thank you so much for coming on today and
Likewise, thank you.
sharing all of this wisdom. It's been wonderful.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.